An overview of the Maryland legislative process and how a bill can become a law in Maryland. Next slide. There we go. So the Maryland General Assembly is a bicameral structure, meaning there are two chambers. The Senate with 47 members, one for each legislative district in the state, and the House of Delegates has 141 members, 3 delegates per each legislative district for the most part. Each annual session lasts 90 days from January to the early April, and special sessions can be called by the governor or presiding officers. Usually those special sessions are if there's something, a really hot topic that comes up in the interim or is particularly trying for the budget. The governor, the presiding officers being the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House will call a special session. Next slide. So how are bills introduced? Bills can only be introduced by General Assembly members. So I can't just go and introduce a bill. Obviously, I need to go to a senator or a delegate and try and enlist their support to take a concept or a statute that I've amended or created and get that drafted. That bill is then drafted by the Department of Legislative Services, which reviews it for and drafts it for legal sufficiency. Bills can be pre-filed before session to give some sense of priority, although that's not always the case. Next slide. So once a bill is introduced, it's assigned to standing committees. There are 4 standing committees in the Senate: Finance, Budget and Tax, Education, Energy, and Environmental Affairs, along with the Judicial Proceedings Committee. In the House, there are 6 standing committees: Appropriations, Economic Matters, Environment and Transportation, Ways and Means, and Judiciary Committee. And then committees will then hold hearings on the bill where public testimony is taken, and there's an opportunity for discussions about bills that are supported, bills that are opposed, and bills that are supported with amendments. And then there's an amendment process that goes on. The committee has the authority to vote favorably or favorably with amendments or unfavorably on the bill. If the committee decides to vote unfavorably on the bill, then the bill does not move any further. It's stopped. It is effectively dead. Next slide. So in terms of the General Assembly operates on a 3-reading kind of rule. And the first reading is a procedural step in the individual chamber where the bill is introduced and there is no debate. So on the floor, the bill is introduced, it's called out, and the agenda keeps moving. There's no debate. The second reading is where it's gone through the committee and there's a debate on the bill and proposed amendments that came out of that committee. And then there's a third reading, which is a final vote by the committee, or by the chamber rather, if passed, and is then assigned to the other chamber if it goes through those 3 readings. As I said before, when a bill does not pass committee, it does not get to the second reading. It goes through the same process in the other chamber once it's assigned. So if a bill goes through the House, through the 3 readings, it's then assigned to the Senate. The Senate refers it to the Committee of Jurisdiction. There is, again, another hearing, and then another floor debate, voting, amendments if needed, and a conference committee is appointed. A conference committee is where both chambers have passed the bill in different forms and can't come to some resolution. So what they do is they set up a conference committee of 3 members of each, 3 members of each standing committee generally meets and tries to resolve the differences between the 2 chambers. More often than not, there is a resolution, although at times there isn't, and the bill will then just die. Next slide. So once a bill goes through that process and passes both, again, bicameral, both chambers, it goes to the governor for consideration. The governor can take a couple of different actions. The governor can sign the bill and make it law. The governor can veto it, in which case it is sent back to the General Assembly for consideration of being overridden, or the governor can take no action, in which case the bill becomes law by virtue of the time delay. And then a veto, if the bill is vetoed and sent back to the General Assembly, the General Assembly can override the veto by a 3/5 majority in both chambers. Next slide. Effective dates of laws are usually the laws take effect October 1st of the year it's passed. So if a bill is introduced and passed in 2025 session, which starts in a month, it is usually effective October 1st of that year, although there are some exceptions to that rule. If it's an emergency law bill, or sometimes they have it for an earlier date, like June 1st. And special session laws, when there's a special session called, they may have different effective dates, not consistent with the October 1st or perhaps June 1st date. Emergency legislation, at times a member will put in an emergency bill, and that requires a 3/5 majority and takes effect immediately upon the governor's signature. When it comes to constitutional amendments, that too requires a 3/5 approval and is then, of course, submitted to voters for consideration in the next election. So in terms of the budget process, we have still a fairly strong executive branch process when it comes to the budget. The governor submits a balanced budget to the General Assembly. The General Assembly can reduce or delete items, can't usually increase appropriations, and it's usually very much executive driven. And both chambers come together. There's a number of conference committees to work out the differences on the budget every year. So in terms of what general issues we anticipate this session, there is a looming budget deficit of about $2.7 billion, which will certainly take most of the oxygen out of the room this legislative session. That includes Medicaid funding constraints amidst rising enrollment and healthcare costs. We're also going to see some changes to the renewable portfolio standards when it comes to energy policy. There will be considerations, again, about education funding and the blueprint for Maryland's future. Along with this budget deficit, there is a need for substantial investments in our transportation infrastructure. You look at the Key Bridge, and that's supposedly being funded out of Congress, but there is funding that will be needed for the Red Line that the governor has made a priority. And then lastly, similar to 2016, there will be some sense of fallout from the presidential election. That is likely to cause some consternation amongst many of the legislators in terms of what decisions President-elect makes. For Leading Age Maryland, we expect to see a few issues of concern. We will continue to advocate for continuing care retirement communities, providers on issues related to entrance fee refunds, and a requirement, an anticipated requirement that there be additional board representation by residents. We will continue to support policies that expand affordable senior housing and enhance access to home-based aging services. And we have had some early discussions with the Attorney General's office, who's got a few bills that we will engage on. Those bills include lowering the threshold for criminal sanctions for caregivers who target financially or vulnerable adults, rather, as well as the Attorney General has a bill that would require in all nursing homes and assisted living facilities cameras and in common areas, and a requirement for those to be stored for a fairly significant period of time. And then on healthcare access and workforce support, we will continue to work on policies that address the healthcare workforce crisis with training, recruitment, and retention. And we, as we do every year, look to expand funding for Medicaid and home and community-based services to support Maryland's aging population. Of course, much of this will be challenged with that looming budget deficit, but we intend to engage on all those issues. Questions? Okay, thank you.